One thing that I've found since I started my YouTube channel 5 years ago is that people can't seem to get enough of the NLP Swish Pattern. I made a video, it was one of my first videos on the Swish Pattern, and right away it started getting views. And I realized that people want to know more about this pattern. How does it work? Why does it work? How fast does it work? It's a fascinating technique. It's a fascinating process because of how fast it works, because of how powerful it is if you do it the right way. And it's often being taught wrong in a lot of NLP institutes. I had the good fortune of my mentor, Steve Andreas, teaching it to me correctly after I had learned it wrong and had been doing it wrong, which is why it wouldn't work. And that's why I wanted to do more videos on the Swish Pattern. If you haven't seen my other videos on the Swish Pattern, I highly recommend that you take a look at those. Each one of them is basically me going at the Swish Pattern from different directions and talking about both theory and practice. What you're about to see was never meant to be put on YouTube. It was a video training that I had done in my group coaching program for the self-concept model, where I was teaching the Swish Pattern because the Swish Pattern was the inspiration for Steve Andreas to create the self-concept model. And so there's a lot that we can learn about the Swish Pattern as it relates to identity and self-concept, because what we're doing when we do the Swish Pattern is a piece of self-concept work. It's a piece of identity work, and a lot of people don't know that, even the people who have studied NLP and have learned this model. So you're going to learn more about that in this video that you're about to see. You're also going to see me do a demonstration with someone, which you'll find extremely helpful. And if you want to be able to do the Swish Pattern, if you want a PDF where I show you step by step how to do the Swish Pattern, you will find that in the description right here down below. Just click that link and I will email it to you. All right. So just out of curiosity, how many people actually know the Swish Pattern? You can either type a Y, or there's a little button and you can raise your hand, which makes this feel like a return to school, grade school and high school. Okay, cool. So we have a mix of people. So if you've done a basic practitioner training, you would have learned the Swish Pattern. And so I can almost confidently say that because practitioner trainings these days, I've seen some as short as like 3 days, and they say NLP practitioner training, become NLP certified, and it's a 3-day course. And I'm just like, no way. There's no such thing. You wouldn't be able to get it into a week, which even some of the big time top trainers are claiming to, or they're doing practitioner trainings in 1 week. And it's just like, no way. No, you're not gonna get it in 1 week. And the first practitioner training that I attended was 2.5 weeks long. And even after that, and it was in person, and even after that, I was like, I don't really feel like I know NLP. The certificate they gave me said for participating. They didn't really check your NLP skills or your knowledge. They sort of did, but not really. And that's when I realized that really the true knowing NLP and being able to use it effectively comes after years of practice, really years, even at a practitioner level. And one of the things that they taught us was the Swish Pattern, and they taught it wrong. And this is a major NLP institute. Now, I wasn't satisfied with doing one practitioner training. I had to do two, and I wanted to do it with a different teacher. So I did a different practitioner training with a different NLP institute after I did my first practitioner training. And once again, they taught the Swish Pattern wrong. Now, I didn't know that it was wrong when I taught it, when I learned it. What I did know is that I couldn't use it effectively. I had tried the Swish Pattern when I first learned it in my first practitioner training, and then I tried it again in my second one. I practiced it at home with myself, and I practiced it with other people at an NLP practice group at the time. And I could not get any effective results out of it. It did not work. And I thought, I blamed myself first. I just thought, okay, I'm not good enough at this yet.
and I need to practice it. So I practiced it some more. Still, it wouldn't work. So I thought, okay, I can't make this work. I don't know why, but I can't make this work. And I kind of put it on the shelf and didn't try it anymore. I didn't use it with my coaching clients because I always, only wanted to use things that were going to be effective, and I just didn't find it effective. And then I met Steve Andreas, and he just kind of blew my world up. Everything that I thought I knew, he basically was like, "No, you got this wrong." He wouldn't normally come out and say it like that. He would just ask me questions until my answers completely fell apart. And then once I was kind of like I emptied my cup, then he would come in and fill it up. One of the things that came up was, well, when he told me to read his book, Transforming Yourself, because he couldn't keep up with my questions. I think it's in the introduction. If it's not in the introduction, it's in the first chapter where he talks about the swish pattern. And he said that when you do the swish pattern and you swish the ideal image of yourself up, he said that ideal image should have no particular context. And in that image, you should also not be doing any particular behavior. So I was like, what? So that was not at all how I was taught. I was taught you swish up an ideal image of yourself doing a behavior you would rather be doing than the compulsory behavior. And you do it in the context of wherever you would want to do it. So, like if you felt like you were overeating, then you would use that first image as the image you would swish away, and you would use an ideal image of yourself either eating right or working out in the gym as your ideal image. That's the way that I was taught. And again, I was taught by some of the top trainers in the world. And Steve was like, well, in this book, he was saying something different. And so I contacted Steve and I said, well, first of all, how do you even do that? Like, it was hard for me to even imagine, how do you swish up an ideal image of yourself with no context and no behavior? Because I connected those things so much to my sense of my ideal of who I wanted to be. And then he went into explaining, well, it's not the easiest thing, but that's why we call it practice. If something doesn't come natural at first, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means you need to practice it in most cases, right? So I accepted that answer. I was like, okay. But, well, I think before I even told him that's not how I was taught, he asked me, he said, who taught you? And I was like, well, you know who taught me. And he already knew. And he said, okay, I don't think that they would teach this wrong. And I said, well, let me go get my manual. And so I grabbed my manual and I grabbed two of them because I had from two different practitioner trainings. And the second practitioner training I did was somebody who Steve had taught at his trainings. But this somebody had kind of reverted to the other body, the other person who I had learned from, instead of taking more of Steve's knowledge and understanding. And I took pictures of the instructions out of my manuals and sent it to him. And by the time I had sent it to him, he had looked it up in the encyclopedia, the NLP encyclopedia. And I'm kind of giving away who taught me at this point because there's only two people who wrote that NLP encyclopedia. Steve had looked it up because you can access it online. And sure enough, in the encyclopedia, which is supposed to be the most definitive work and most definitive and complete work of all NLP technology, they teach the swish pattern wrong. And so what I wonder about this too is, did Steve evolve the swish pattern realizing that these components need to be this way for it to work? Or was he originally taught it correctly, like everyone else? And then you had schools or people who kind of deviated. You had all of these people learning from the original two founders, Richard Bandler and John Grinder. And once they learned it, did they kind of branch off and insert their own ideas? And then some people got it incorrectly. It's hard to say. Now, Michael Carroll, who is was kind of like Steve's, not Steve's, John Grinder's teacher, main teacher. Like Richard Bandler has, oh, what's his name? Oh, I forget his name. I can picture his face, but I can't remember his name. John Laval. John Laval is Richard Bandler's main guy. Michael Carroll is John Grinder's main guy. And Michael Carroll did a video on the Swish Pattern on their YouTube channel, which is John Grinder's Academy, and he teaches it wrong. And Steve let him know. Steve commented on the video and said, "Hey, you're teaching this wrong." I don't think they responded to him, but Steve wrote an article calling out all these trainers who had posted videos on YouTube because he went through them and showed them how and saying how each one had gotten this wrong, including Tony Robbins, because Tony Robbins has a Swish Pattern video. I also want to say I was not immune to this either. Steve would go onto my website and tell me what I was doing wrong, what I was saying wrong, and what he thought I was over promising. Because you kind of have to use a little flamboyant marketing language. He didn't like that, like something about unstoppable confidence. He was like writing me an email. He said, "Damon, I sell this on your website, and if I put a gun to your head, you would have no confidence. Your confidence would be gone. So there's no such thing as unstoppable confidence." And I'm like, "Come on, Steve, cut me a break here." But anyway, that was Steve. So we talked about it, and he realized that I had been taught incorrectly, and it wasn't like I had just bungled it from the beginning. He realized that, and so he's like, "Okay, well, yeah, this is how the Swish Pattern is done, and give it a try." And I did, and it worked incredibly well. And so I tried it on other things, and it was working finally. So the times that I had tried it in the beginning and it wasn't working, this was the difference that made the difference. And I got so excited about this that I made a YouTube video, and it was one of my first YouTube videos. It's one of my most viewed YouTube videos, and it was before I was doing it on a regular basis. And I look back at it now and I was like, it just looks strange to see me doing this. It was like almost 6 years ago, but the information's still correct. And I have since made some additional YouTube videos on the Swish Pattern because it is really something that you can learn so much from. And it was the inspiration for the self-concept model. This pattern is what inspired Steve to start asking questions about identity. And that's what led him into creating the self-concept model. And that's why it's mentioned in his book, Transforming Yourself. Because what he realized was when you swish up that ideal image of yourself, and it's independent of context, and it's independent of behavior, what you're looking at is pure identity. What you're looking at transcends space and time, which is your sense of self. And the reason why, especially, you don't want any particular behavior or context is because you want this to generalize as widely as possible throughout every area of your life, and so that you can insert whatever behaviors would work to fit this. But if you swish up an image of yourself and it's connected to a context and connected to a behavior, that's your only option. And that then is no longer about identity anymore. It's about the place and the behavior. So when you think about logical levels, and if you've learned NLP, you should have studied at least a little bit about logical levels. And I don't mean neurological levels by Robert Dilts. That is different, and it's not even based on logical levels. Logical levels by Gregory Bateson, who was a teacher at UCSC whenever they were creating NLP. And so John Grinder and Richard Bandler used a lot of his teachings to shape and form the technology of NLP. And one of them was logical levels. So logical levels, when you think about identity is a very high logical level. And then below that would be sort of like context and behavior. Above identity would be self-esteem. That's meta to your identity. How you feel about it would be meta to it. So that puts it on a higher logical level. So an example of why the Swish Pattern doesn't typically work when you connect it to behavior or context is because it's not as versatile, it's not as flexible, and it doesn't generalize to everything. So an example would be, say somebody wants to quit smoking and they go to an NLP coach, and the coach says, okay, well, what's a behavior you would like to do instead of smoking? Like, what's something else you could do that's you could replace that behavior with? And that's not a bad question either, because one of the things that will ensure failure in something like quitting smoking or any bad habits is to not replace that habit with something else. If you simply just quit, then all you're doing is you're taking whatever value is being fulfilled through the compulsory behavior, such as smoking, and you simply shut it off and you said, okay, no more fulfillment there. And so this value goes unfulfilled. Well, the unconscious has a way of making sure you get your values fulfilled, even if it's not that much, even if it's not that good, even if it's not a really good strategy to do it. Trust me, you will be determined to fulfill at least a little bit of your values. And so what happens normally, if you don't make a choice, a conscious choice of what to replace that with, that will fulfill that value, actually will fulfill that value, it usually goes whatever falls in its place, which could be is probably something else that's going to be a bit destructive. So that's replacing smoking with, say, overeating or binge watching Netflix series or something like that. Something that is an attempt to fulfill that value that's going unfulfilled immediately, and it's usually sloppy because you're not making a conscious choice here. So one way to help with these types of things is to find out what the value is that's trying to be fulfilled, and then find multiple strategies in which to fulfill that value that will actually work. That's a different kind of process. With the swish pattern, what you're doing is you're breaking the pattern of compulsion and in a sense, reminding yourself of who you want to be and where you want to go. So if I connect this particular behavior to that, it may or may not work. And everything would have to work out perfectly for it to work. So here's what I mean by that. Say I want to quit smoking. And well, we'll go back to the example. The person goes to the NLP coach, and the NLP coach says, well, what would you rather do? And the person says, well, I'd rather work out. Instead of smoking, I'd rather go work out. Sounds normal, sounds reasonable, right? So they do a swish pattern. They start off, well, what is that compulsory image, that really associated image, and that moment, that point of no return when you feel compulsed to go and pick up that cigarette and smoke it. So that would be the image that they start with, which is typically going to be associated, because that's when you feel very compulsory. Typically, you're very associated and you kind of have blinders on. Everything becomes about that cigarette in this case. Everything else gets blocked out. And so you break that pattern by swishing up an image. So if this NLP coach, has them swish up an image of them working out to break that pattern, this sounds like it would be a pretty good thing, right? So they feel compulsed to get that cigarette. And as soon as that happens, the pattern breaks because they've rehearsed this. The ideal image of this person comes up of them working out, and they go, "Ooh, I don't want to smoke. That's what I'd rather be doing. I'm going to go work out." That's great if you have the time to go work out and you're near a gym or you have the stuff there to do it. But what happens if you're a member of a gym and it's not a 24-hour fitness, so it actually closes that night, and you wake up at 3 in the morning and you go, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have a cigarette? Chances of you actually getting out of bed at 3 in the morning to go work out is very, very slim, even if the gym was open, and in most cases it won't be. So you're not able to perform that function. So that image would swish up. They would maybe recognize it consciously or not, but immediately it would be like, well, that's not an option here. What is the only option now? If that's not an option, what is the option? go have the cigarette because I need this thing fulfilled, right? So that's why the swish pattern doesn't work, at least not very well, if you connect it to a behavior or a context or both. So in this case, the behavior was working out, the context was a gym. Two things that are not available or not likely for someone to do when they wake up at 3 in the morning. But a cigarette's so much easier to grab at 3 in the morning than going out and working out at a gym. So this is why we need that ideal image of ourselves to have no particular behavior and no particular context. And it does take a little bit of practice for most people to create an ideal image of themselves. That ideal image where you see that image of yourself and you just know that is the me who I want to become. That is the me who not only has solved this problem, but has solved all of my problems. This is the me fulfilling all of my values. And there's just something about the way that I look in this image that just lets me know that. And so you might have to put a little effort into creating that image. We also want to be disassociated. We don't want to be associated ideal self. We want to be disassociated. Does anybody know why? So the compulsory image is associated. When we feel compulsed to do something, the tendency is we feel very associated and we kind of have tunnel vision. This is one thing that we want. And by the way, when we have a phobia of something, we tend to be very, very associated as well. So I'm not knocking being associated. In fact, we want to live the majority of our lives associated because that means, we're present to now. But there's varying degrees of association. You can be extremely associated, or you can be associated into a past memory, which is what a phobia is. When you have a phobia, it means you are associating into a phobic experience, a scary experience. And you're so associated into it that even though you're not there right now, it feels like you are. And so it induces a lot of anxiety. And then, you get really tense and people are like around you, like, what are you so afraid of? There's nothing going on. And you're like, feeling very anxious. It's because you're overly associated into a past memory of something bad that happened. So Carmen says something to move toward, don't already have it. Yeah, exactly. What is motivation? Sorry to say pulls one toward, yeah. I was trying to figure out what the dis-ass means, but I think you mean disassociated. To disassociate is good so that you don't have attachment to outcome. Not in this case. And the outcome here is a little nebulous, right? Your ideal self, it's a little nebulous. As soon as you become your ideal self, then the ideal self is something different than what you are, right? So that keeps you moving forward, keeps you improving, keeps making you better and better. So it's not about non-attachment, but I mean, I could see how that could be a factor you may want to use. Like, yes, it's not so much about the arrival, it's more about the arriving. So if I have this ideal image of myself out in front of me, then I'm going to feel compelled to move in that direction, to become that person. And if some sort of compulsory behavior that I'm engaging in prevents me from being that person, then that's what I want to switch so that I break that pattern of compulsion. And one of the incentive to do that is this ideal image of myself that swishes up and I go, yeah, that's who I want to be. I don't want to be this person who does this habit that's preventing me from being that. And let's say if I were to step into my ideal self and actually become that, and that's the ideal here, right? And that's why we do self-concept. We are discovering our highest values, and we're transforming those values into qualities of who we are. So we're becoming our ideal selves. But as soon as we become that, we create more potential to improve on that. So our ideal self should always be out in front of us. We should always be aspiring to be that ideal self. Now we got to be careful that this is not about perfection as well. And the cool thing about the Swish pattern is you don't really have, it's such a simple pattern. You don't really get caught up in perfection. It's just about breaking a pattern, and you want this to go unconscious. Like people say, well, how many times a day should I practice the Swish pattern? I'm like, don't. You practice it like 7 to 10 times, and then you test it to make sure that when you access the compulsory image, the ideal image automatically pops up. Once you know that that's happening, then let it go. You want this to become unconscious, because when it becomes unconscious, then you don't. If you don't have conscious awareness of it, then there's no negotiating. There's no like, well, I could go have that cigarette. No, there's none of that. You broke the pattern. The ideal image came up. You're not consciously aware of it. It's all happening in your unconscious, and you go, oh yeah, I don't need that, and you just keep doing. You go in the direction of who you want to be. It's the same thing with, like, I use this analogy all the time. You probably heard me say it. When people come in, want me to help them with willpower and discipline, and they say, I have no willpower, I have no discipline. And I'll say, do you brush your teeth? Yeah. Every morning? Yeah. Every evening? Yeah. How long you been doing that? Ever since I can remember. How do you do that? How do you have that willpower? How do you have that discipline to be so consistent? And they go, well, I haven't even thought about that. And that's the key. You don't think about it. You've already made the commitment. You know you want fresh breath. You know you want to hold on to your teeth for as long as you can. This is not a negotiation anymore. You've made the commitment, so you just do it. It's unconscious. You wake up, you do it. Before you go to bed, you do it. Can you imagine if you had to negotiate with this every single morning and try to, spend 15 or 20 minutes trying to figure out, should I brush my teeth this morning? you know? And so I would say, if you're doing that, then you're not very clear about your values. You're not very clear about the value of the behavior. And you'll need to take a step back and do that. So we want this to go unconscious. We want you to be clear about your ideal self. And so you want this to go unconscious, so you're not negotiating with it anymore. It just happens. Now, I'm speaking of it in terms of visual, and the Swish pattern is most often done and was created in the visual modality. Not everybody's visual. So the question then becomes, can you do this in an auditory way, and can you swish kinesthetically? And the answer is yes. If you use the same process, it's the exact same thing. And with auditory people, if I was to encounter someone who was very auditory and we were going to use the Swish pattern, I'd have to get a little creative, and I would have to elicit what works best for the person. Because I'm not very auditory, I wouldn't know exactly the best way to swish it. And so we'd have to find out where those voices located and in which location would it work for them. Typically with a visual, if it's in front of you, you can't not see it, and you have to take in that knowledge. But when it comes to something that's auditory, sometimes right in front of you is not the best place. Sometimes right on the side of you is actually more powerful. So if somebody was very auditory, we'd have to test these things to find out where to put their ideal voice. The voice that's telling them who they want to be versus the voice that's telling them to go do whatever it is they want, whatever the habit is that they want to break. We'd have to find out where's that voice coming from, and then we'd have to find out where would the ideal be. And it might just be a matter of replacing it the same location. We'd have to find out. We'd have to do some elicitation. Now, swishing kinesthetically, that would probably be even trickier. And not because we can't just swish it in the body, because we can. But we would want to make sure that this person who's claiming to be kinesthetic, that it's not emotional kinesthetic. If it's emotional kinesthetic, the swish is not going to work. We would have to, because the swish works off of what is the stimulus, not the response. And emotional feelings are a response, not a stimulus. So it would have to be something kinesthetic that would stimulate the negative behavior. And then you would swish that with a kinesthetic, like we call it kinesthetic perceptual, which is a touch or proprioception. You would have to swish that with another kinesthetic perceptual feeling. And so that could get really tricky. What I have found is that even people who are very auditory and kinesthetic can still use the visual and use it successfully with a swish pattern. And I wouldn't suggest someone who's auditory to try to switch to being visual, or someone who's kinesthetic to switch to being visual. But there is a lot of value in cultivating the visual sense if you don't have it or you don't use it very much. So it's not about replacing. It's just about cultivating an addition, the visuals even more than which you have it. Because with visual information, we can access so much more information all at once. You know, if I hear more than one voice at a time, even if it's just two voices, I can't make sense of either one. But if I look at a painting, I can process probably 7 to 10 colors all at once, right? So the visualization is very powerful that way. Let's see, was there something else? I think I've kind of fleshed this out. Now, I do not, I rarely use the swish pattern in my practice, in my coaching practice. And I rarely use it on myself, but I will on occasion. It's kind of a fast and dirty way to do identity level work. Of the NLP patterns, it's probably, of such a simple and short pattern, probably the most powerful. And not the most powerful pattern. Most powerful pattern alone, or a technique, would probably be re-imprinting. But for how long it actually takes to do the swish pattern and how simple and easy it is, it's extremely powerful. But what I'll normally do is self-concept work. So instead of swishing up an ideal image and hoping the person makes all of those connections of this image of themselves, that this is them fulfilling all of their highest values, rather than taking that chance, when I do self-concept work with someone, I'm taking each one of those values one by one, and we're transforming them inside that person's identity. So they have lots and lots of information about what it means to be that quality. And that makes self-concept work the most thorough and diligent that you can possibly be. The swish pattern is working fast and dirty. And there's a time and a place for that, to work fast and dirty. And it's just fun. The swish pattern's fun. And if you haven't tried it, I hope you try it out. And what I do require in my coaching certification program, that you do learn it. And primarily because it is a piece of identity work, and it's really good to understand how this pattern works. Let's see. So the ideal self has already achieved success in multiple areas of like life, money, fitness, friends. So when you say that, Andreas, you're still kind of referring it to like context, specific context, and material objects. Whereas the ideal image of yourself works more on the level of ideals, which is values. And values are generalizations about experiences that are important to you. So money is kind of like a strategy to fulfill a value. Fitness would be the same thing, and having friends would be the same thing. So we're less focused on the material and the context, and we're more focused on the ideals. That when you see that ideal image of yourself, this is you fulfilling those generalizations about experiences that are important to you. And so it sort of ties in those other things, but they're going to, those, like money, fitness, and friends, that's going to be different for everyone. Some people might not think of those things. You might have the same values, you might share the same values with someone, but how you go about getting them might be completely different. So it puts values on a higher logical level, which makes this very powerful and very motivating. So you'd want to be more on the level of values. So for example, this ideal image of myself that I'm going to swish up, I'm going to see a lot of my ideal values. Those would be things like passion, joy, happiness, peace, creativity. Okay. Now I know what those things mean to me. And when I'm working with a client, I don't need to know what those things mean to them as long as they're identifying their values and they're looking at this ideal image of themselves. And what they see in this ideal image is them fulfilling those values, being their ideal self. That's all that really matters. So, can you say more about the stimulus versus response part? Okay, so visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Visual, I see something, I have a response to it, which we call either emotional or evaluative kinesthetic. I see something and I go, wow, that's beautiful. Okay, so my feeling about that is that it's beautiful. Or I see something and go, ugh, that was terrible. So my emotional evaluative response, this is my kinesthetic evaluative or kinesthetic emotional, is the response to the visual stimulus. Same thing can happen with auditory. I hear someone say something nice to me, and my emotional evaluative response goes, oh, wow, that's nice. Thank you. Or they criticize me, and I go, ugh, what an asshole, something like that. So that's my emotional evaluative response, which is a kinesthetic thing, but it's not the same as kinesthetic perceptual, which is tactile, like touch. It's not the same thing as my emotions or my evaluations. And proprioception would be the other thing. Proprioception is I can feel my body in time and space without actually having to see it. I know I'm raising my hand right now, even though I'm not looking at it, because I can feel it in my body. So that's proprioception. So that's what we call kinesthetic perceptual. When people say I'm very kinesthetic, they take an NLP course and they go, oh, I'm very kinesthetic. And I'll say, how do you know that? And they'll say, oh, because I always have to feel it when I before I make a decision. Or I always, I feel things a lot. And it's like, okay, that's everybody. Everybody feels things. Everybody evaluates things before they do them. We take in information, right? We have an evaluation about it, and then we make a choice. That's always going to be the process. So the evaluative and emotional kinesthetic is just a response to whatever stimulus we're taking in. But lots of people confuse, and I did too. I was like, that's what one of those things that happened with Steve. I said, well, I'm very kinesthetic. And he goes, what do you mean? And just the same thing. And I was like, well, I feel things. And he goes, okay, Damon, we're all kinesthetic that way. All of us. Nobody makes a choice until they've evaluated the information. And that is a feeling. And a lot of times this happens unconsciously as well. So I'm going to run through the steps of the Swish pattern, and then I'll take a volunteer if anyone wants to do it. So the steps are basically this. You take a compulsory behavior, a habit, something that feels like you can't stop yourself once you get going. And you identify visually that point of no return and it helps to take like the last time. Usually the last time this has happened will be the time that it's really fresh in your memory. So we can go back to the smoking thing. Now, this can be with eating, overeating. This can be used with eating too many sweets or biting your nails. And I've heard people apply the Swish pattern in so many different ways that go outside of like some compulsory, using a compulsory behavior to overcome. And that's all fine because it never hurts to try this pattern out on just about anything. But the design of the pattern was meant for something that is sort of habitual and compulsory. But feel free, after you've got a sense of how the model works, to apply it to almost anything. I've heard people applying it to like diseases and things like that. And, you get these anecdotal stories about how people heal themselves. I don't know if they're true or not, but what we do know is that the Swish pattern does not have any harmful side effects. So it certainly doesn't hurt to try. So you identify a compulsory habitual behavior that you want to stop. And so let's say smoking. And so I would have the smoker think about the last time they felt compulsed to have a cigarette, almost like they either didn't really think about it and suddenly they were smoking before they even really had a sense of making a choice about it, or they wanted to not do it, but they couldn't stop themselves. And so what'll most likely happen pretty much every time I've elicited this, it's always in an associated image, because that's the point of like it feels compulsory. You have the blinders on, all you can see is the cigarette or whatever it is that you're compulsed to do. And so you have the person rewind it until you find that exact point where that happens, where they go from a point of, I could still say no to this, to a point of it's too late. And once they have that, that's the image you're going to use to start with. And then you have them let that go. Put that aside for now. And then you have them create an ideal image of themselves. And this is that person who has solved not only this problem, but all problems, and who is living their highest ideals, their highest values. And this is often the longest part of the process, having a person create that image. And it does not need to be perfect. It needs to be, though, a representation of their ideal self, doing no particular behavior and in no particular context. Very, very important. So you have them create that image. And then when you start the process, you're going to start the process with typically here, because you cannot not see this if it's right in front of you. And that would be the compulsory image. And down here would be the ideal image. And so I'm going to show you a general swish, but you can get creative with this. And I'll explain a few ways that you can get creative with this. So you have this big compulsory image up here. You have this ideal image of yourself down here in small. So a very traditional swish would be you swish this image down as it gets smaller, and the ideal image comes up and gets bigger and takes up all of what is in your field of vision. So you can no longer see the compulsory image. Now, this is really, really important, okay? Make sure you're paying attention to this part. When you have them practice it again, because you want them to do this 7 to 10 times, make sure that they don't swish it back down and reset that way. Very, very important, because if they do that, then you'll have this yo-yo effect. Every time after they've practiced this and they go out into the real world and this thing actually happens, what's going to happen is an ideal image of themselves will swish up, but then the compulsory image will swish back up. So once they've done the swish once and their ideal image comes out, you just tell them, let that go. Just let it go. If you do your hands differently, they may follow your hands and swish it back down. So I don't even do anything with my hands. I just say, okay, let that go. And then I say, have them like take a deep breath, or I might ask them a question to kind of like get their attention off of that. And I'll say, okay, start again. Compulsory image up here. Ideal image down here. Swish up and then make it bigger. And then they do that, and then I say, okay, let it go. And then I may say something to them to kind of break their state, and then we do this 7 to 10 times. So make sure they're not swishing back down and getting this yo-yo effect. I taught this in my practitioner training, and I emphasized not doing that yo-yo thing. I said, be very careful that when you reset the images that you're not moving them back up and one back down. And James, one of my students, comes back the next day and says, of the training, and he says, the swish pattern doesn't work. It was really messing with me. And in fact, it kind of made me feel sick. And so what's going on? He says, well, the ideal image keeps swishing back down. The compulsory image swishes back up. And I said, I told you, I can grab the video and show you where I told you not to do that. It's very important. And so we had to fix it, because compulsory image was swishing back up and he was doing the compulsion. All right. How about someone who says they are very controlling or perfectionist? If that is feels like a compulsion to them, that should work. It still should work, because this will work best with things that people feel compulsed to do. They don't want to do it. Okay, that's very important too. So they know their values about this. They don't want to do this. Not all people. There's a lot of people who want to be controlling. There's a lot of people who want to be perfectionists. I've had students who were trying to transform the quality of perfectionist, like as part of their identity, and I was like, whoa, no, don't do that. That's going to create a lot of problems. So if a person feels compulsed to be controlling, or they feel compulsed to be a perfectionist and they don't want to be, this would work well for that. Now, here's the other thing. You can still try this pattern. I'm not telling you not to try it. It's okay to go beyond the bounds of, a compulsory behavior. It's okay. Try it. It'll either work or it won't. And if it doesn't work, like I said, there's no harmful side effects. James, let's see. If one was to use Swish Pattern to aid anger management, would we first need to work on isolating what the internal stimulus is that leads to the rage? Absolutely. And anger is a good one, because there, with some exceptions, most people do not want to be angry. But when people get angry, a lot of times they feel like they can't help it. So yeah, this would definitely work. James says, if you do use your hands because it feels more effective, what do you do with your hands when you break state? So if I was using my hands, and I often do it like in the beginning to kind of get them a sense of it, then I do like that. I don't bring my hands back the same way. So yeah, good question. And then after a while, I have the person practice it themselves, and then we test it to make sure. And I'll say, okay, we break the state. I'll ask them what they had for breakfast or something like that. And then I'll say, okay, go ahead and see that compulsory image again. And when they do, usually you'll see their head kind of do like that. That's a little exaggerated, but you'll see like their eyes lift up. And that usually means they are seeing their ideal image come up. And usually that's how you know. And then I'll ask them, because they're still consciously aware of it. I said, did it swish up? And if they say yes, then we're done. And I don't want them to practice it anymore. I want that to go unconscious. It'd be much more powerful that way. Let's see. I tried Swish with an energy drink. I no longer buy that particular drink, but then switch to another brand. How can I do the Swish for all energy drinks? Maybe if you could create an image of like a generic looking energy drink that would symbolize all energy drinks, maybe that would work. They use my hand as an eraser and tell them to erase the images so we can restart again. That's good. Is it okay if the one practicing it use their hands? Yeah, I think that's fine. Just as long as they're not, again, we just make sure that they're not going back the other direction. Does this work with overspending habit? Again, if it's a compulsory thing, and there's a lot of times, like for some people, shopping is definitely a compulsory type thing. Yes, it will work for that. And again, if you're not sure, it's still okay. You can still try the pattern. Still give it a shot. It may work. All right. Does anybody want to give this a try? Anybody want to volunteer? Let's see. Image of cigarettes. Can you switch with the image of cigarette and the ideal version? Yeah. So it's whatever the compulsory image is. So most likely it'll be a cigarette, but maybe it's not. Maybe there's something else that triggers them to want a cigarette. So once both images have been created, the beginning behavior starts off big, and new image, the ideal self, is smaller. Yes. And then as you switch the size of the switch, yes. And let me also say, and there's other ways you can do this, as far as like, some people start with the compulsory image real big, and they'll put in the corner the ideal image. And what happens is the ideal image expands and takes over the compulsory image. For some people, that works better. So if your person's struggling with the way that I just mentioned with that switch, you can always do it that way. Or you can start it in the middle and it expands. So you can get creative with this. I started doing this, and Steve didn't tell me not to, so I figured it was okay. I would take the the ideal image, and so I'd have the compulsory image here, and I'd take the ideal image and I'd throw it out there, and I'd have it sling back and smash dramatically the compulsory image, kind of like the Death Star blowing up on Star Wars, you know. And then here with this ideal image of myself, like with all the debris, you know, flying everywhere. And I thought that was kind of cool, and it was very compelling for me. So I used that, and it seemed to work okay. I mean, it did work. So uh, I think creativity is always a helpful thing. Yeah, would you ideal image be the same for all swishes? Yes, in general, yes, it would be. So whoever is interested in volunteering, share with me what it is you would like, the habit or whatever you'd like to break. And I know some people, like, you can work without knowing the content, but I'm asking for the content because I want to make sure it's a good for this process. That's the only reason why I'm asking. So hopefully it'd be something you don't mind sharing. Um, you know, it's not too personal, too sensitive. Okay, so anger. Okay, we could probably work with that. Sleeping in the daytime. Okay, anybody else? No, just two people are interested. Okay. Energy drink. Too dirty to share your habits. Let's see. I'm looking for. So I think the anger thing would. I think the anger thing would be interesting. I've never done it for that. Let's try anger. So Shosh, I'm looking for you up here. Where are you, Shosh? You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Damon.
Hi. Let's see. Where are you? I'm looking on the. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, now I lost you again. There we go. Okay, I think there's a way. Let me see if this works. Okay, yeah, that's what I want. Okay, well, thank you for volunteering.
Thank you, Damon.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people are shy about volunteering, but actually volunteering during trainings was one of my strategies for getting good at this stuff. Every chance I got, if a teacher said, you know, I need a volunteer, my hand would go right up. And so I do recommend that. I think that's a good way. And this is being recorded. So if you know you feel like, well, I'm on the inside and I'm volunteering for this, so I don't get to see it from the outside. Well, you could always watch the recording if you want to do that. So, all right, great. So let's talk about this this thing with anger. Now, you don't need to give me a lot of details. So if you know if you don't want to share a lot of these details, it's okay. The last time that you got angry, where it felt like a compulsion, how long ago was that?
Specifically 2 nights ago.
Okay. So do you remember what led up to that?
In step-by-step manner, whatever the outer world contextual issue was that led to the anger happened, but the internal stimulus for me was something I had worked on, having recognized the anger, and that stimulus was a vision of the other party doing um, a an unethical act.
Okay.
It was my appraisal and then reappraisal of that process that it's basically spiraled my emotions out of control. The context of the anger was it was very paralytic, and I was not able to essentially function for about 4 or 5 hours, and that was a good day because I could get it under control.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is something that happens like reoccurring, not like maybe not like every day, but this is a reoccurring sort of thing that happens.
I've done some self inventory on this behavior, and I've counted about 30 examples.
Okay.
So it's once a month, but
Okay.
when it's severe, yeah.
That's fine. Like I don't. So whatever the compulsory thing is that you're working with, you don't necessarily. It doesn't need to be something that happens every day or multiple times a day, but you want to see that there is a consistent pattern here. So we have established that if he can count 30 times and say about once a month, there's consistency there. So that works. Now, this last time that this happened, if you were to like start with when you were angry, uh, how do you remember that? Are you associated when you think about that?
I'm literally right there.
Yeah,
Um,
that's typical.
it, and it's like I'm haunted by a ghost. So it's actually making me reenact.
Okay, so we
what
don't want to go there.
was
Keep
said.
some distance from it.
Sure.
And so this is going now. This lets me know that this is actually going to be very good. This is a good thing to use for the swish pattern because he's actually starting to feel it. He is associated, and when you feel extreme emotions like that, you can almost always bet you're going to be very associated. It's when you disassociate that you can actually get some distance from it, and that can actually be a good strategy to use sometimes. Um, and that's similar to what we're going to use here, but not quite. So what I want you to do is I want you to roll this back and go as slow as you need to go until you find that point that was of no return, where the emotions came on and there was no stopping you. You were going to fly into this rage or whatever you want to call it. So find that spot, the spot right at between the point where you could intervene and the point where you could no longer intervene. Like it was, you were on.
Okay.
You got it?
Yeah.
And you can see what, you don't have to tell me what you're seeing, but can, you could see as if you're actually there and this whole thing's about to happen.
Correct.
Okay, good. All right, let that go. And so for everyone else, turn on your sensory acuity because you can see this affecting him. The way he's breathing, his shifting in his breathing, um, his posture and everything. These are classic examples of he's really feeling this. And so this is sort of confirmation that we're on the right track here. All right, so now let's completely shift gears, and I want you to think of an image of yourself, no particular context, no particular behavior, an image of yourself that is the you fulfilling your highest values. You've already solved this problem and many, many more. You've solved every problem out there, and just see yourself being that ideal you. And you don't even have to know for sure what it is exactly about this you, this image of you, but it's just, you just know it. This is the you who is really doing it, really fulfilling your highest values and has solved not only this problem, but many problems. Now, check out
Okay.
his posture here, his breathing, his head's tilted up. You can tell he likes this more. Completely different um, body posture and breathing. So you like this, I assume?
This is way better than rewinding the tape.
Yeah. So is this who you want to be when you see this you? Is this who you want to be?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Because I know what the other one leads to.
Yeah. Is there any way you can tune this up even more? Like maybe if you make the image even bigger or brighter or more colorful. Now, sometimes that actually diminishes it for some people because maybe it doesn't seem even close to being realistic. So it all depends on the person, but just try some of those things out. If you can tune this up a little bit to make it more compelling. And really what we want is we want the image to make it feel like it's sucking you in. Like you have to actually resist jumping in there because it's like, I want to be him. I want to jump in this there now, but we don't want to do that. But you want to feel that compulsion, that pull to move toward being him.
Okay.
Yeah, you can even see, I don't know if you caught that, everyone else, he's kind of like you can actually see him moving in a little bit, like he's sitting a little bit further up, which is a good sign too. All right. And this is something you can even improve on later. And a lot of times what people report back is whenever they go to do a swish pattern for another thing, another behavior, like later on, they'll pull up that same ideal image, but it's evolved a bit. And that's always a fascinating thing. Like, that's great that your unconscious is evolving that ideal image of yourself, making it more compelling. So that's good. All right, so let's let that go for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up that compulsory image in front of you. And we'll try the traditional way first. And if that doesn't seem to work well for you, we can always change it up and get creative about this. So put that compulsory image in front of you, and beneath it, put a smaller ideal image of yourself down there. You can't really see it, but you know it's there. Okay. And in a moment, don't do it yet. In a moment, what you're going to do when I say swish, that compulsory image is going to shrink and go down as that ideal image comes up and takes up your entire field of vision. Okay. You ready?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, swish.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
Now, everybody else, have your sensory acuity turned on because you can see this happening. Okay. Now let that go. Just let the screen go blank. Okay. Now, once again, compulsory image in front of you, taking up your field of vision. You know that ideal image is down right below it, smaller. And in a moment, when I say swish, you're going to swish up the ideal image, make it bigger as you swish down the compulsory image. 1, 2, 3, swish. Very nice. And just let that soak in. See that ideal image of yourself and know this is who you're becoming and who you want to be. Great. Okay, let that go. Clear the screen. Okay. Put the compulsory image in front of you. You know that ideal image is below you. And swish. Just really take that in. Okay. Let it go. Take a deep breath. I'm going to do a little bit faster now. Compulsory image in front of you, ideal image below it, and swish. Okay. Let it go. Clear the screen. You're enjoying this, huh?
I was like, I'm feeling a difference. It's crazy, actually.
Yeah. Well, we're breaking a pattern is what we're doing. Okay. Compulsory image in front of you, ideal image below it, and swish. Okay. Now, I'm going to have you do it on your own 2 more times. So take your time, set it up for yourself, and then just swish it. All right. Did everybody catch each time that he swished? You should have been able to see it in his body. Yeah, it's pretty cool, huh? Okay, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had a toast and margarine, two toasts.
Okay, so that's just a little way to get his mind off of this so we can kind of clear the slate. Now, let's see what happens whenever you just look at that compulsory image. Okay, so I take it the ideal image came up for you automatically.
Yeah, actually, when I laughed only because just 3 moments ago when I had the compulsory image, I didn't have the baggage associated with it anymore.
Yeah.
It was really weird and good.
Okay, cool. Do you have any objections or any internal resistance to breaking this pattern and becoming that ideal you instead of flying into a rage or flying off into anger?
No, actually, I know the reason why you asked that question, and no, I don't have a voice or a visceral feeling telling me this is not a good thing to do.
Mhm.
Not on, not on this particular occasion.
So with those times, those 30 times that you mentioned where you flew off into this anger, um, did they all seem to be in one particular context, or did the context vary?
Sadly, it was on when I got to the sixth episode, I realized it was completely independent of a certain component of my generalized life. So I was getting it in different pillars of my life to the same severity and intensity.
Okay. So let's take whatever context this has happened in. I know that could
Okay.
be, you could say like one context could be family, one context could be work, another context could be social life, something like that. Whatever the context where that this has happened, and stay disassociated. And I want you to see yourself functioning in those contexts where something that would normally have caused you this anger, but no longer does anymore, and see yourself behaving differently. See yourself behaving in a way that you would prefer, which is not necessarily to say that you're just like okay with it all, because sometimes, if you see an injustice or something's unfair, you do want to speak up, but maybe flying off into, a fit of rage is not going to work very well, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't speak up. So see
So
yourself in each one of those contexts,
yeah,
dealing with this in a way that would be the best way that you could possibly deal with it. And also, as you're doing this, check in. Is there any resistance to being that person?
I've gone through 3 or 4 memorable examples, and I'm not having the pressure um, that I normally get when I have when I reenact a moment. Um, I'm almost like laugh it off.
Hmm.
Um,
Let's take this into the future, though. I want you to see future possible situation, and so with the future, we don't know what the future holds. So you don't need to know specifics. You don't need to know like exactly what happened. You don't even need to know the people. You could just see that there are people there. Maybe you can't actually see their faces, but maybe in some cases it has to do with particular people. That like family members who you're going to be with. So you do want to use that detail, but the future, we can keep it rather vague, but you just want to see yourself in a situation in the future and notice how you're different. You're dealing with the situation in a way that serves your values. It's who you want to be instead of being angry.
yeah, there's definitely a looseness of me in that situation, so I'm not uh, like a spider about to attack.
Mhm. Yeah. So think about it like, how would your ideal self be in those situations? How would your ideal self act in those situations in the future?
Would you like me to describe it, or um,
If it helps you, if you think it'll help solidify it for you, then yes. Otherwise, it's not necessary.
I think in a nutshell, there's more levity to it. It's definitely a lighter sense, buoyant and not a loaded situation. So
Mhm. Okay, good. All right. So how do you feel?
I'm going to keep working at it because I felt it actually three, 4 attempts ago when I just started laughing. It was definitely a like a 180 compared to how I behaved.
Mm.
2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, and literally the word was, I was paralyzed basically, and I couldn't function. And took quite a bit of work to find space even in that paralyzed state in order to do the dishes or tell myself I'm going to go to bed on time. Whereas what I experienced here was it was you know it was a chuckle, if you like.
Good. Okay. So if you want to work with it a little bit more, I think that's fine. But in general, this will become more powerful once it goes unconscious. And it's not a thing that you have to think about. Like, that's the other thing too. What's good about NLP is it's really about programming this stuff in so that when the time comes where you're in a situation like that, it's not like you have to go, oh, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? That's extremely difficult to deal with. But if it's unconscious, it automatically leads you in the direction of where you want to go, who you want to be.
Thank you, Damon.
All right.
Yeah,
thank you so much for volunteering. That's great. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? In which case, because we're kind of over time, we can do that. You can unmute yourself and ask me rather than having to type it in.
Hi, Damon.
Hey.
So, what was it after he repeated it several times? What happened right after that? What did you have him do after that?
So he does a swish. Okay,
Right.
so he does a swish multiple times, and then we test it. We want to make sure that it naturally swishes up without him having to make it swish. So we test.
How do you do that part? How do you test it?
So I wanted to completely break his state. So I asked him what he had for breakfast to
Right,
get
I
his mind
remember that.
completely off of it. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then I said, okay, so what happens now when you think about that compulsory image?
Okay.
And then as soon as he thought about it, you could see his body shift, and you could see like the image came up. So I would always ask him if it did, but we could tell, like we know it did. So once we do that, then I want to ask him, is there any resistance to being different?
Okay.
Is there any resistance to being this ideal self rather than getting angry? And so we want to check in. That's what we call congruence check.
Right.
And so he's very clear. He definitely wants to be this ideal image, and he doesn't want to be angry. So great. There's no reason why this should not work. If he was incongruent about it and I didn't check and he had resistance to it, it would most likely undo the change that we just did.
I was just about to ask you, what would you do if there was resistance then?
Then we would need to get clear about that resistance. So what is that resistance trying to tell him? We don't want to just push it away. All resistance has a positive intention.
Right.
So we want to know what that positive intention is. Another word for positive intention is value. So we want to know what value is that resistance trying to fulfill.
Right.
And so in a situation like this, it would not be uncommon for that resistance simply to be, well, if you take away my anger, then what if somebody does something that's not right? I don't want to just not deal with it. I don't want to not say anything. So resistance like that would be common for it to come up. And then we say, okay, well, how do we incorporate that into the ideal image of yourself, where you are this ideal image, you are this ideal person, and that ideal person, even though that you're not getting angry, that ideal person also doesn't say this is okay. This ideal person addresses it and asserts,
assertive instead of aggressive.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So that
gotcha.
would be
Thank you.
one way that we would incorporate that. And then we future pace, right? I had him think about future situations so he can see himself acting in this new way.
All right. I apologize for the noise. Everybody suddenly started.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Damon, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
If he says, well, I hope this worked, or, well, I'll just keep practicing, does that mean we need to practice at this moment more to make sure it's solid and it's in the unconscious mind?
So it's okay if a person, after you've done an intervention like that, if they don't know for sure if this is going to work. And the truth is that neither do I. Based on lots of practice and doing this process with people and watching the way that he went through it, I would say I feel pretty good that this is going to work. Maybe it won't. And if it doesn't, then it just probably means that a more complex technique or process would be needed here. But just because he's not sure of it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work. You know, it's not like he has to be super confident. And in fact, I would be a little skeptical if somebody said, "Oh, I know this is going to work." You know, I'd be like, I don't know. That sounds like somebody's overcompensating. So I think where he's at right now is just a kind of genuine curiosity. Let's see if this works. And so I think chances are really good that it will. But, you know, who knows? In fact, you should let us know, Shash, the hard part about this is though he could totally encounter a situation where he would normally have gotten angry, but he won't, and he won't even think of it that way. So it's not like he can come back and say, yeah, there was this moment where I normally would have gotten angry. He might just move right through it, not get angry, and then, you know, we don't really know. And so that's kind of another problem with NLP, is we call it NLP amnesia. A person experiences a change, they don't really, it's not just like I consciously do something different now. It's more like I unconsciously do something different. So I'm not necessarily going to notice it. Now, if he goes a few months and he looks back on the past, say like 3 months, and he realizes he hasn't gotten angry like that, whereas before he counted up that it occurred about once a month, then that's a pretty good bet. And we could say, okay, it is definitely working.
Thank you.
Damon, also, I have a list of people, probably about 5 or 6 people that I'm accountable to that can offer feedback.
Okay.
So
that would be good. Yeah, that's another way to confirm it. Joe says, would it be good to check for resistance in the beginning? Sure. That's you can check congruence at any point. No matter what, though, at the end of it, you definitely want to check congruence, because in the beginning he may have no resistance, but by the end, when the changes happened, he might. So usually you can hear the resistance in a person's voice. If you've cultivated sensory acuity skills, you usually spot resistance before you even have to ask. You know, a person who doesn't sound very clear about what they want, and they're telling you, yeah, this is what I want, and I'm going, something else is going on here. Absolutely ask about it. Let's see. I love that you called that a problem. What a blessing. Problem. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. About NLP being an unconscious thing, maybe you were referring to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. It doesn't. It's not great necessarily for if you have a one-on-one coaching business, because you do these changes and people go, you know, I see them the next week, and I'm like, so how's life? And I'm like, oh, it's great. And like, so you notice anything different? Oh no, things are the same. It's like, okay, so last time I talked to you, you said you were not this quality, whatever it was. I said, are you this quality? And I'm like, well, yeah. And well, I've always been that. It's like, no, you know, just last week you weren't. We did this work. My own wife, that's happened with, where I helped her transform a counterexample, a very troubling, somewhat traumatic incident. And like, she cried through the whole thing until we were done. And then she felt better. And then later, it was like a month later, I was referring to it, and she goes, I didn't have a problem with that. I was like, you cried. You didn't have a problem with it? But anyway, so yeah, that happens. Oh, you're welcome, Kate. Okay, any other questions? It's really
can I have a quick one, Damien?
sure.
Was it? Just curious. When you were asking for examples before, and I suggested sleep or falling asleep during the day, it's a bit involuntary. I was just wondering, is that something that doesn't fit this exercise? Like,
It could.
Well, I mean, I think it's compulsory to a degree, but I also see that it's not quite fit the other examples you were mentioning. They're a bit more tangible.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't want to try this too hard, somewhere where you don't think it's actually the right exercise to use.
Well, like I said, it's not going to hurt anything. So I would go for it. You never know. I'm all in favor of trying simple, fast, and easy techniques. And then if the simple, easy, fast technique doesn't work, then you go to something more complex.
Sure enough. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so give it a try. And who knows?
Awesome.
I just thought that the anger things sort of exemplified.
Oh, by all means. Yeah, totally. No doubt about it. I just wanted to know that, well, that which I asked. So one last thing, the ideal example, the one you changed, swishing it out with, I kind of missed. Are you associated or disassociated in that one?
Definitely disassociated. It's a very important part of it.
Right. So you're moving from an associated compulsion to a disassociated ideal alternative.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's critical. Thanks.
All right. Anybody else? Well, you're very welcome. Yeah, so I encourage
I
you
have
to
one
try.
question.
Sure.
Sorry. The anger, do you want to be dissociated, like see yourself behaving this way and then swish it with seeing yourself behaving differently, or you want to be associated?
You want to be associated because that's part of the compulsion. That's part of the structure of compulsion is when you're associated. So we're breaking that pattern. We're breaking that association and the compulsion by swishing in the ideal image, which redirects the attention. Okay, one more question if anybody has one.
Hi, yes, I would like to know what is the purpose of the future pacing at the end?
Future pacing is always something you want to do at the end of any process to have the person start to see themselves in the future behaving in this new way. One of the ways we do this really powerfully is in the self-concept model, we create future examples. So like whenever I first started doing the self-concept model and I started accessing examples of a quality and either, modeling that or eliciting that from a quality that I was already certain about, or I was building a new quality or transforming a new quality, one thing that I didn't naturally have in my qualities was future examples. And some people do have them naturally. I always find that fascinating when people have them naturally. But by putting those future examples in there, it makes it feel like, well, okay, well, I'm on the path to this. It creates a feed forward system of, well, yeah, it sort of starts to pave that pathway already into the future of me having this change and being this new person. And so what a lot of times people report whenever they start creating future examples is they start to kind of relax. And it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to try so hard. I can see it. I can see it in the future. I know that this is who I'm going to be and this is what I'm going to do. So it has a lot of very powerful effects on the success of this change taking effect. Good. All right. Well, you guys have been wonderful. I love sharing this stuff. It seems like all of you are really into it, and that always energizes me.
I hope you enjoyed that training. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments right here down below. I do read them and I do answer your questions. And like I said earlier, if you would like to be able to do this model, if you'd like to practice it, do it on yourself and do it with other people, especially if you have clients, I give you a step-by-step on how to do it, how to do the Swish pattern. You will find that in the description right here down below. Just click that link, like I said, and I will email it to you. Take care.